The Death of John by Louisa May Alcott. Hardly was I settled again when the inevitable bowl appeared, and its bearer delivered a message I had expected, yet dreaded to receive. John is going, ma'am, and wants to see you, if you can come. The moment this boy is asleep, tell him so, and let him know if I am in danger of being too late. My Ganymede departed, and while I quieted poor Shaw, I thought of John. He came in a day or two after the others, and one evening when I entered my pathetic room, I found a lately emptied bed occupied by a large, fair man with a fine face and the serenest eyes I ever met. One of the earlier comers, who had often spoken of a friend who had remained behind, and those apparently worse wounded than himself might reach a shelter first. It seemed a David and Jonathan sort of friendship. The man fretted for his mate, and was never tired of praising John, his courage, sobriety, self-denial, and unfailing kindliness of heart, always winding up with, "He's an out of fine feller, ma'am. You see if he ain't." I had some curiosity to behold this piece of excellence, and when he came, watched him for a night or two before I made friends with him, for, to tell the truth, I was a little afraid of a stately-looking man, whose bed had to be lengthened to accommodate his commanding stature, who seldom spoke, uttered no complaint, asked no sympathy, but tranquilly observed what went on about him, and as he lay high upon the pillows, no picture of dying statesman or warrior was ever fuller of real dignity than the Virginia blacksmith. A most attractive face he had, framed in brown hair and beard, comely featured and full of vigor, as yet unsubdued by pain, thoughtful and often beautifully mild, while watching the afflictions of others, as if entirely forgetful of his own. His mouth was grave and firm, with plenty of will and courage in its lines, but a smile could make it as sweet as any woman's, and his eyes were child's eyes, looking one fairly in the face with a clear, straightforward glance, which promised well for such a place their faith in him. He seemed to cling to life, as it were rich of duties and delights. He had learned the secret of content. The only time I saw his composure disturbed was when my surgeon brought another to examine John, who scrutinized their faces with an anxious look, asking of the elder, "Do you think I shall pull through, sir?" "I hope so, my man." And as the two passed on, John's eye still followed them, with an intentness which would have won a clearer answer from them had they seen it. A momentary shadow flitted over his face, and came the usual serenity, as if in that brief eclipse he had acknowledged the existence of some hard possibility, and asking nothing, yet hoping all things, left the issue in God's hands with a submission which is true piety. The next night, as I went my rounds with Dr. P., I happened to ask which man in the room probably suffered most, and to my great surprise he glanced at John. Every breath he draws is like a stab, for the ball pierced the left lung, broke a rib, and did no end of damage here and there. So the poor lad can find neither forgetfulness nor ease, because he must lie on the wounded back or suffocate. It will be a hard struggle and a long one, for he possesses great vitality, but even his temperate life can't save him. I wish it could. You don't mean he must die, doctor? Bless you, there is not the slightest hope for him. You'd better tell him so before long. Women have a way of doing such things comfortably, so I leave it to you. He won't last more than a day or two at furthest. I could have sat down on the spot and cried heartily, if I had not learned the wisdom of bottling up one's tears for leisure moments. Such an end seemed very hard for such a man, when half a dozen worn-out, worthless bodies round him were gathered up gathering up the remnants of wasted lives, to linger on for years perhaps, burdens to others, daily reproaches to themselves. The army needed men like John, earnest, brave, and faithful, fighting for liberty and justice with both heart and hand. True soldiers of the Lord. I could not give him up so soon, or think with any patience of so excellent a nature robbed of its fulfillment, and blundered into eternity by the rashness or stupidity of those at whose hands so many lives may be required. It was an easy thing for Dr. P to say, tell him he must die, but a cruelly hard thing to do, and by no means as comfortable as he politely suggested. I had not the heart to do it then, and privately indulged the hope that some change for the better might take place, in spite of gloomy prophecies so rendering my task unnecessary. A few minutes later, as I came in with fresh rollers, I saw John sitting erect, with no one to support him, while the surgeon dressed his back. I had never hitherto seen it done, for having simpler wounds to attend to, and knowing the fidelity of the attendant, I had left John to him, thinking it might be more agreeable and safe, for both strength and experience were needed in his case. I had forgotten that the strong man might long for the gentler attendance of a woman's hands, the sympathetic magnetism of a woman's presence, and as well the feebler souls about him. The doctor's words caused me to reproach myself with neglect, not of any real duty perhaps, but of those little cares and kindnesses that solace homesick spirits, and make the heavy hours pass easier. John looked lonely and forsaken just then, and he sat with bent head, hands folded on his knee, and no outward sign of suffering, till, looking nearer, I saw great tears roll down and drop upon the floor. It was a new sight there, for though I had seen many suffer, some swore, some groaned, most endured silently, but none wept. Yet it did not seem weak, only very touching, and straightway my fear vanished. My heart opened wide, and took him in, as gathering the bent head in my arms as freely as if he had been a little child. I said, let me help you bear it, John. Never on any human countenance have I seen so swift a beautiful a look of gratitude, surprise, and comfort, as that which answered me more eloquently than the whispered, thank you, ma'am, this is right good. This is what I wanted. Then why not ask for it before? I didn't like to be a trouble. You seemed so busy, and I could manage to get on alone. You shall not want it any more, John. Nor did he, for now I understood the wistful look that sometimes followed me, as I went out after a brief pause beside his bed, or merely a passing nod, while busied with those who seemed to need me more than he, because more urgent in their demands. Now I knew that to him, as to so many, I was the poor substitute for mother, wife, or sister, and in his eyes no stranger, but a friend who hitherto had seemed neglectful, for in his modesty he had never guessed the truth. This was changed now, and, though the tedious operation of probing, bathing, and dressing his wounds, he leaned against me, holding my hand fast, and if pain wrung further tears from him, no one saw them fall but me. When he was laid down again, I hovered about him in a remorseful state of mind that would not let me rest till I had bathed his face, brushed his bonny brown hair, and all things smooth about him, and laid a knot of heath and heliotrope on his clean pillow. While doing this, he watched me with the satisfied expression I so linked to see, and when I offered the little nosegay, held it carefully in his great hand, smoothed a ruffled leaf or two, surveyed and smelt it with an air of genuine delight, and lay contentedly regarding the glimmer of the sunshine of the green. Although the manliest man among my 40, he said, yes, ma'am, like a little boy, received suggestions for his comfort with the quick smile, and brightened his whole face. And now and then, as I stood tidying the table by his bed. I felt him softly touch my gown, as if to assure himself that I was there. Anything more natural and frank I never saw, and found this brave John as bashful as brave, yet full of excellences and fine aspirations, which, having no power to express themselves in words, seemed to have bloomed into his character and made him what he was. After that night, an hour of each evening that remained to him was devoted to his ease of pleasure. He could not talk much, for breath was precious, and he spoke in whispers. But from occasional conversations I gleaned scraps of private history, which only added to the affection and respect I felt for him. Once he asked me to write a letter, and as I settled pen and paper, I said, with an irrepressible glimmer of feminine curiosity, "Shall it be addressed to wife or mother, John?" "Neither, ma'am. I've got no wife, and will write to mother myself when I get better." "Did you think I was married because of this?" he asked, touching a plain ring he wore, and often turned thoughtfully on his finger when he lay alone. "Partly that, but more from a settled sort of look you have, a look which young men seldom get until they marry." "I don't know that, but I'm not so very young, ma'am. 30 in May, and have been what you might call settled this for 10 years. For mother's a widow. I'm the oldest child she has, and it wouldn't do for me to marry until Lizzie has a town of her own, and Laurie's learned his trade, and we're not rich, and I must be father to the children, and husband to the dear old women, if I can." "No doubt, but you are both, John. Yet how came you go to war? If you felt so, wasn't enlisting as bad as marrying?" "No, ma'am, not as I see it. For one is helping my neighbor, and the other pleasing myself. I went because I couldn't help it. I didn't want the glory or the pay. I wanted the right thing done, and people kept saying the men who were in earnest ought to fight. I was in earnest, the Lord knows, but I held off as long as I could, not knowing which was my duty. Mother saw the case, gave me her ring to keep me steady, and said, 'Go,' and so I went." A short story and a simple one, but the man and the mother were portrayed better than pages of fine writing could have done it. "Do you ever regret that you came when you lie here suffering so much?" "Never, ma'am. I haven't helped a great deal, but I've shown I was willing to give my life, and perhaps I've got to. But I don't blame anybody, and if it was to do over again, I'd do it. I'm a little sorry I wasn't wounded in front. It looks cowardly to be hit in the back, but I obeyed orders, and it doesn't matter in the end, I know." Poor John! It did not matter now, except that a shot in front might have spared the long agony in store for him. He seemed to read the thought that troubled me, as he spoke so hopefully when there was no hope, for he suddenly added, "This is my first battle. Do they think it's going to be my last?" "I'm afraid they do, John." It was the hardest question I had ever been called upon to answer, doubly hard with those hard, clear eyes fixed on mine, forcing a truthful answer by their own truth. He seemed a little startled at first, pondered over the fateful fact a moment, then shook his head, with a glance at the broad chest and muscular limbs stretched out before him. "I'm not afraid, but it's difficult to breathe all at once. I'm so strong it don't seem possible for such a little wound to kill me." Mary Mercutio's dying words glanced through my memory as he spoke. "'Tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough." And John would have said the same, could he have seen the ominous black holes between his shoulders. He never had, and seeing the ghastly sights about him, could not believe his own wound more fatal than these, for all the suffering it caused him. "Shall I write to your mother now?" I asked, thinking that these sudden tidings might change all plans and purposes. But they did not, for the man received the order of the divine commander to march, with the same unquestioning obedience with which the soldier received that of the human one, doubtless remembering that the first led him to life and the last to death. No, ma'am, to Laurie, just the same. He'll break it to her best, and I'll add a line to her myself when you get done. So I wrote the letter which he dictated, finding it better than any I had sent. For though here and there a little ungrammatical or inelegant, each sentence came to me briefly worded, but most expressive, full of excellent counsel to the boy, tenderly bequeathing mother and Lizzie to his care, and bidding him good-bye in words the sadder for their simplicity. He added a few lines with steady hand, and as I sealed it, said, with a patience sort of high, I hope the answer will come in for me to see it. Then turning away, his face laid with the flowers against his lips, as if to hide some quiver of emotion, and the thought of such sudden sundering of all the dear home ties. These things had happened 2 days before. Now John was dying, and the letter had not come. I had been summoned to many deathbeds in my life, but to none that made my heart ache as it did then, since my mother called me to watch the departure of a spirit akin to this in its gentleness and patient strength. As I went in, John stretched out both hands. I knew you'd come. I guess I'm moving on, ma'am. He was, and so rapidly that, even while he spoke, over his face, I saw the gray veil falling that no human hand can lift. I sat down by him, wiped the drops from his forehead, and stirred the air about him with a slow wave of a hand, and waited to help him die. He stood in sore need of help, and I could do so little, for as the doctor had foretold, the strong body rebelled against death, and fought every inch of the way, forcing him to draw each breath with a spasm, and clench his hands with an imploring look, as if he asked, how long must I endure this, and be still? For hours he suffered dumbly, without a moment's respite, or a moment's murmuring. His limbs grew cold, his face damp, his lips white, and again he tore the covering off his breast, as if the lightest weight added to his agony. Yet through it all his eyes never lost their perfect serenity, and the man's soul seemed to sit therein, undaunted by the ills that vexed his flesh. One by one the men awoke, and round the room appeared a circle of pale faces and watchful eyes, full of awe and pity, for, though a stranger, John was beloved by all. Each man there had wondered at his patience, respected his piety, admired his fortitude, and now lamented his hard death, for the influence of an upright nature had made itself deeply felt, even in one little week. Presently the Jonathan who so loved this comely David came creeping from his bed for one last look and word. The kind soul was full of trouble, as the choke in his voice, the grasp of his hand betrayed, and there was no tears, and the farewell of the friends was more touchly for its brevity. Old boy, how are you? Faltered the one. Most through, thank heaven, whispered the other. Can I say or do anything for you anywheres? Take my things home and tell them what I did, that I did my best. I will. Goodbye, Ned. Goodbye, John. Goodbye. They kissed each other tenderly as women, and so parted, for poor Ned could not stay to see his comrade die. For a little while there was no sound in the room but the drip of water from a stump or two, and John's distressful grasps as he slowly breathed his life away. I thought him nearly gone, and had just laid down the fan, believing its help to be no longer needed. Then, when suddenly he rose up in his bed, and cried out, with a bitter cry that broke the silence, sharply startling everyone with its agonized appeal. For God's sake, give me air. It was the only cry pain or death had wrung from him, the only boon he had asked, and none of us could grant it, for all the airs that blew were useless now. Dan flung up the window. The first red streak of dawn was warming the gray east. A herald of the coming sun, John saw it, and with the love of light which lingers in us to the end, seemed to read it in a sign of hope or of help, for over his whole face there broke that mysterious expression, brighter than any smile, which often comes to his eyes, to eyes that look their last. He laid himself gently down, and stretching out his strong right arm, as if to grasp and bring the blessed air to his lips to a fuller flow, lapsed in a merciful unconsciousness which assured us that for him suffering was forever past. He died then, for, though the heavy breaths still tore their way up for a little longer, they were but the waves of an ebbing tide that beat unfelt against the wreck, which an immortal voyager had deserted with a smile. He never spoke again, but to the end held my hand close, so close that when he was asleep at last, I could not draw it away. Dan helped me, warning me as he did so, that if he was unsafe for death and living flesh to lie so long together. But though my hand was strangely cold and stiff, and 4 white marks remained across his back, even when warmth and color had returned elsewhere, I could not but be glad. Through his touch, the presence of human sympathy perhaps had lightened that hard hour. When they had made him ready to be for the grave, John lay in a state for half an hour, a thing which seldom happened in that busy place. But a universal sentiment of reverence and affection seemed to fill the hearts of all who had known or heard of him, and when the rumor of his death went through the house, always astir, many came to see him, and I felt a tender sort of pride in my lost patient, for he looked a most heroic figure, lying there stately and still at the statue of some young knight asleep upon his tomb. The lovely expression, which so often beautifies dead faces, soon replaced the marks of pain, and I longed for those who loved him best to see him when half an hour's acquaintance with death had made them friends. As we stood looking at him, the wardmaster handed me a letter, saying it had been forgotten the night before. It was John's letter, come just an hour too late to gladden the eyes that had longed and looked for it so eagerly. Yet he had it, for after I had cut some brown locks for his mother, and taken off the ring to send her, telling how well the talisman had done its work, I kissed this good son for her sake, and laid the letter in his hand, still folded as when I drew my own away, feeling that his place was there, and making myself happy with the thought, even in its solitary place, in the government lot, he would not be without some token of the love which makes life beautiful and outlives death. Then I left him, glad to have known so genuine a man, carrying with me enduring memory of the brave Virginia blacksmith, as he lay serenely waiting for the dawn of that long day which knows no night. And that's the end of The Death of John by Louisa May Alcott. I liked it. I thought it was better than the last Louisa May Alcott story I read. I'm probably going to find. First of all, I'm probably going to keep reading Louisa May Alcott because I like this story. So I think there's more good stories from her I'm going to read. However, I'm also going to read more contemporary authors that write short stories. I'm going to try to find some public domain short story writers that could write as good, if not better, than Louisa May Alcott. Hopefully, someone more current, someone more progressive, someone more current with the times. It doesn't have to be like literally 20 authors from 2022. It could be authors from 1960, authors from 1980, authors from 2005, authors from 1940. Anything more contemporary than Louisa May Alcott. I'm going to look for more contemporary authors to read. I know most authors are not in the public domain because they want to sell their material. I will look for people in the public domain or someone who's open sourced their work or whatever, who doesn't mind having it read in the public. I'm going to look for people like that, because I want to find more contemporary people than Louisa May Alcott to read. I do like this Louisa May Alcott story. I like this story. It's a lot about death and how miserable life can be, and it's really short. And it's difficult facing the grim realities of life and how it can go so quickly, and it's death is really a slow process, and it's hard to come to grips with that. So I'm going to keep reading Louisa May Alcott, but I'm also going to look for newer authors who are better or as good as her. But I like this story. This story makes me want to keep reading her. This story makes me want to continue down this road, because I do like Louisa May Alcott, because she talks about real life and real issues people face on a daily basis. Like, death is something that we all think about. We all should think about death as much as possible, because death is what keeps us alive. When you think about death, it makes you want to live longer, because this life is all we have, and we need to make the most of every day. Let me know in the comments below, what did you think of the story, The Death of John? Please subscribe to this channel to be part of the community, and please like this video. It really helps the channel out a lot. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.